Hi folks, welcome to Scholarbot Tarot. Just call me Mayfield, and thanks a ton for stopping by the study space. Today, I'm just going to talk about all of the pop culture themed decks that I have in my collection. So this tag is pretty much inspired by Neev's video a while back, like a really while back. Like I think this script has been sitting in my, well, it's been a hot minute. Neev which technically combined two separate hashtags for pop culture tarot, and the first one was hashtag pop cult tarot, and the second one was hashtag pop culture decks. I want to say that the pop culture decks one has actual prompts, which we're not going to be doing today. I'm going to be taking a little bit of a different structure to those tags, and I just really enjoyed Neev's video, so I decided to do basically like something similar. On that note, I will absolutely credit the two tarot tubers who created the respective tags in the description below, along with the videos that they posted. I honestly didn't think I was going to have very many pop culture themed decks until I wrote this script, actually. So yeah, honestly, much like Neev, I'm probably just going to show off all of the tarot decks that I have that are adapted from pop culture franchises. So there are still going to be timestamps below as well, but first we do have to get through definition and a couple of disclaimers as we continue into this video. But if you just want to get right into the fun stuff, then you could check out the timestamps in the description as well. So first, a definition and the aforementioned disclaimers. In Mayfield fashion, I do have my handy dandy notes here. So according to the Oxford Bibliography website, yes, we're going there, the academic term for pop culture is defined as a set of practices, beliefs, and objects that embody the most broadly shared meanings of a social system. It includes media objects, entertainment and leisure, fashion and trends, and linguistic conventions, among other things. Not many people actually realize how broad the actual concept of popular culture really is until you hear the definition. Every single person is a participant of pop culture, whether we mean to or not. We're participants in the way that we dress, the way that we speak, the way that we shop, and the way that we spend our leisure. With that said, colloquially, or the way that we talk about pop culture, we just think geek, right? More specifically, when we say pop culture, we're thinking films, we're thinking video games, books, music, stuff that consumes our attention. In both formal and informal definitions, tarot is also a form of pop culture, depending on how you interact with it, of course, but it's still kind of a byproduct of that, right? For our purposes within this video, I'm kind of limiting this list to adaptations or a tarot deck that has been adapted from a franchise. Unofficial decks do count, so any decks that are adapted from a franchise but are not like licensed or anything like that, those still count. The only thing that I need from it is that it does need to be adapted from a specific intellectual property. So like the zombie tarot, for example, even though zombies are a pop culture phenomenon, does not count because it is far too broad. For the same reason, mystical medleys also doesn't count because, you know, rubber hose, that's fine. Rubber hose animation, Fleischer animation, if you're more familiar with that terminology. That's pop culture, obviously, but it is not adapted from anything specific like Steamboat Willie, if you will. Furthermore, you may hear me say like certain slang or other terminology throughout this video that's almost exclusive to fandom, including the word fandom. So I promise to include definitions within the video and perhaps even put them in the description below in case you like miss anything. I'm not in the business of gatekeeping or making anyone feel lost. I do what I can. I know the Dobby Hawks video was like a little weird, but I will do my best to include you into the conversation in any way that I can. Okay, disclaimer's done. Let's have a look at some geek-themed decks that are in my collection. Okay, excellent. Welcome down to the study space with our very first category, decks that are based on books. And to start us off, we have the Azathoth Tarot by Nemo's Locker. And this is based off of the works of H.P. Lovecraft. Now, oh, and for the record, this is also the 6th edition. I only know that because I had to actually look it up. I don't have a certificate, what is it called? The Certificate of Authenticity, which apparently comes in these decks. I bought this like secondhand, and I had to look up the different backs because that's usually how they're determined to be a specific edition. But at any rate, kind of full disclosure, I have never really read very much Lovecraft in my life. I guess that's not totally true, at least not on purpose, because I was assigned some of his novels in college. Either way, I guess I was intrigued by the lore surrounding many of these creatures when I found this deck. I do remember reading one of his short stories that was about a doctor that did weird chimera experience on some remote island. If you've ever watched The Simpsons, it was parodied in one of the Treehouse of Horrors episodes where everyone was turned into animals. Anyways, I read that short story in grad school for a graduate level English course about Frankenstein, of all things. I did try reading Lovecraft's novels during quarantine, but at that time they were kind of difficult for me to get through. I may try again soon, specifically to gain a little bit more context for this deck. Some folks may tell you that it's kind of bad faith to read any Lovecraftian titles because he was unapologetically a racist incel. But since he's been dead for a really long time and his works are now in the public domain, I'm pretty sure he's fair game. And while we're here, just a brief note on the concept of death of the author, since it's been carelessly tossed around in recent years. Death of the author merely refers to the idea that once a work is out in the world, the audience becomes an agent of interpretation of that work. Some would even go far as to say that the author's context with which they wrote their work does not matter. And I think that it's that aspect of the argument regarding context that leads some people to misconstrue death of the author to a more emotional argument, namely, like, I guess the more popular way to think of it is that it doesn't matter how awful the author is, their work is out there for you to enjoy, and you shouldn't be ashamed of that, which is not what death of the author means. And if you insist that it still is, I will add an addendum to that. The author is only truly dead when they don't profit from their work anymore. See? We'd work our way back to Lovecraft. For more information on death of the author, I linked a couple videos in the description box below, but this is often what I think about whenever I look at this deck, unfortunately. And the other deck that I have for based on books would be the Poe Tarot by Trisha Leigh Schufelt. Now this deck admittedly didn't make it to the list because it's all of Poe's literary works. But I think that much like Lovecraftian lore, I feel like all of his works just kind of exist within the same universe. Although that might be because of other pop culture adaptations of Poe that I've seen. I don't know if there are any fans of The Fall of the House of Usher that was on Netflix. I hadn't seen it, but I had seen like a video essay or two on it, and so I was pretty intrigued by that. But anyways, I remember reading The Raven, The Cask of Amontillado, and The Telltale Heart when I was in high school, and I think it might be high time for a reread. I actually heard a while back on Twitter that the main character of The Telltale Heart isn't referred to with any pronouns, so their students actually discuss the narrative as told by a woman, which changes the conversation of the entire story. And I'm so incredibly curious to read it through that lens for myself. In regards to the deck itself, I really like the quotes used for each card. Out of context, they work incredibly well with the card that they're assigned, as well as standalone. I don't know if affirmations would be the right term, but for lack of a better term, let's just say affirmations. I mean, also like statements to reflect on, or even as writing exercises. It gives very much Harris Burdick vibes. And if you're not familiar with Harris Burdick, it's he's like this character in this, I think, children's book where supposedly he disappeared and left behind, images, a title, and a quote at the bottom of accompanying each and every image. And so that's often used as a writing exercise for, kids and adults alike to create their own stories. Alrighty, and for our one and only entry in decks based off of cartoons, we have Tarot of the Unknown by Chris Smith. Now this deck is based off of the cartoon Over the Garden Wall. Let me go ahead and zoom us in just a little bit. There we go. Over the Garden Wall is an essential watching experience during the fall season. My partner and I like to watch it during Thanksgiving, but it's a rather mellow Halloween watching experience too. This surreal cartoon came out in 2014 and is about a teenage boy and his younger brother wandering through the woods in search of their way back home. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with like popular fan theories within like the creepypasta umbrella. Creepypastas tend to be more contemporary folklore or horror storytelling on the internet and quickly grew to include popular media. Some of the more common creepypasta tropes include fictional characters being deceased or comatose as we experience like the canon journeys and narratives that they're dreaming of. Kind of like, I'm trying to think of an example, like in Pokemon, where some fans theorize that the main character, Ash, was in a coma from Pikachu's Thundershock in episode 1, and the rest of the series was like just a dream, which is why he's like 10 years old for 25 years. Or another good one is, if you're familiar with the Cartoon Network show Ed, Edd n Eddy, there was a really popular like purgatory theory where the cul-de-sac is technically a purgatory space and all the kids died in various eras and just teleported there. Yeah, so I only bring this up because Over the Garden Wall definitely gives off that kind of vibe. Something seems a little bit off sometimes in some of the episodes. It's very fantastical, very whimsy, and it's very unsettling at times with a few moments that make you wonder if this is just a fever dream or even the road to the afterlife. I do have the Farewell Winter printing, which does, I feel like it adds a little bit more to that melancholic tone with the added context of the box. But what you're looking right now is actually the mini edition, which has, more autumn vibes as the first edition kind of did. So it's basically, what you're seeing is basically an RWS clone with a few name changes for pun reasons. If we actually fast forward here to the Hierophant, this is Adelaide the Hierophant. I actually thought that was a typo. You'll see that it says Aerophant. But thankfully I got a hold of the guidebook, which was sold separately, and lo and behold, it's, I guess, just a pun. For decks based on films, well, once again, we actually have just one singular entry for this one, but it's gonna have to be the Star Wars Tarot by Jeremy Ellis. This is another RWS clone with an unofficial Star Wars skin, and it encompasses all three trilogies, which I thought was super impressive. I remember quite a few years ago when someone listed this deck on eBay for over $1,000. And apparently, when I did a little bit of sleuthing for like where this deck even comes from, I guess at the time Ellis had only released 12 copies back then. I don't know why he only released 12 copies. It could have honestly been to just hide from the mouse, which is why someone tried reselling their copy at such a high price. But thankfully, since then, Ellis would occasionally take pre-orders of his social media. Or excuse me, he would take pre-orders on his social media. Also probably to hide from the mouse. He actually reskins the RWS with a bunch of like different properties. And they're really interesting just to see how different that they can be despite all of them being RWS clones. Drops are completely random, you know, to hide from the mouse. It's okay, not for long. That copyright is coming for you, rat. And it'll encompass so much more than just Steamboat Willie. So I'm not gonna lie to you, when I originally wrote down decks based on games, I was honestly thinking like video games. But I only have one of those decks, and it technically wasn't even something that I'm like intimately familiar with. The only deck that maybe once upon a time I would have gotten probably would have been Tiny Tina's like tarot. It came in like a special collection box for the game Borderlands. I forget which one it was. I want to say it was Borderlands 3, but I don't remember. It was so long ago. But at any rate, I did not expect to have more than one deck based off of tabletop games, of all things. But you know, here we are. And for the first one, I've got the deck of many things, the Animated Tarot by Hit Point Press. This thickums is a Dungeons and Dragons themed tarot. And if you get the deluxe edition, which I have, which I'm not showing on camera because it's like just as massive as this deck is, it comes with this huge guidebook that includes how to incorporate the deck into a D&D campaign. And you could do this like from, you know, character designs, or I'm sorry, character creations to rolling your stats. And for those of you who are Dungeons and Dragons players, I want to say that this is based off of the 5th edition of the game, which for non-D&D players, that simply means that it's for the most, well, at the time of this, the writing of this script, it was the most recent version of the game, but I do think that that has since changed. I think there's like a 6th edition that came out, so unfortunately the book may be out of date. But from what I can tell, not only is the 5th edition perhaps the more popular version, I'm sure that a lot of what you might read in the deluxe edition might still be really applicable. Unfortunately, as even though I play D&D, I have like a campaign with some friends that's been going on since like the beginning of quarantine. So we've been playing the single campaign for 3 years. I will admit I'm not the best player because I struggle with role playing just a little bit, but I am a very useful I am a very useful character, thankfully. For those of you who are interested, I play a Divine Soul Sorcerer, and my character is honestly supposed to be kind of lax anyways. He's supposed to be, you know, the kind of character who just kind of doesn't really give a shit. He's in it for a good time, not a long time, but the DM keeps throwing just responsibility after responsibility towards him, and it's like, god damn it. Anyways, so with regards to the deck itself, the animated tarot is certainly unique. As you can see in that the art is lenticular. I get a little bit dizzy when I look at it too long, but I normally get really motion sick in general, so that kind of checks out for me. Also, I haven't yet taken off the protective film from it because I'm kind of scared to. I really maybe should do that, but I'm concerned with the feeling of the lenticular, like there's like a lenticular feel to it that's kind of rough that makes me squirm a little bit. But at any rate, if you've ever played D&D, maybe why don't you just tell me what character you played and what your role was. Next up on our tabletop surprise is we have Life is Like a Board Game by Crystal Banner. Considering this deck is an indie deck and also like an unofficial adaptation, I almost forgot to include this, but I'm really glad that I had an aha moment where I'm like, oh, that's technically based off of a specific thing, because I definitely think it counts. Life is Like a Board Game takes a ton of icons, primarily from Monopoly, and incorporates it brilliantly into the tarot. The different icons make perfect sense to me and are super simplistic, and each suit is basically a color match. See, here's our Fool with the go symbol. Anything can happen. You can land on that dumb income tax and lose your $200, which is always the saddest thing that you possibly can do. But anyways, each suit is a complete color match, complete with keywords that are baked into the street names so that they don't really feel too forced, I guess. Normally, I'm not the biggest fan of keywords, but it's never a deal breaker. It's just that these keywords are super on brand for what the deck is, and it also makes a hell of a lot easier for when I get a core card. Because if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure all the pages, for example, are development, and we just skipped a king, I think. And like all the kings are providers, and that is incredibly helpful for me to navigate the court cards a lot easier. And our last entry in video games, I guess it's sort of like I mean, it kind of bleeds into anime a little bit, but for our purposes, this definitely comes from a video game. This is the Toho Tarot Blooming Chaos 2. I think it might be a second edition. I'm not 100% sure, and I actually don't know who made this deck. I'll make sure I put that in the description below. So these are very long cards. It's also Major Arcana. Let me zoom out a little bit because these are long. Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, so where do I even start with this one? Because I feel like, once again, it's going to be a lot to explain, and frankly, I'm not very well equipped to explain it, but I'll do my best here. So, as I mentioned earlier, it is a Major Arcana only, featuring characters from the popular gacha series Project Toho by Zune. How do I define a gacha series? Well, it's a type of video game with a vending machine mechanic. So, like, there's in-game currency that you can accrue by simply playing the game in order to buy characters or power-ups. Or players can just buy in-game currency with real money to purchase their preferred extras that they want. One could argue that it's basically gambling, but that's an entirely different conversation. Any Hoosier. Toho began its days as a bullet hell style overhead shooter game. Think Galaga, but like on steroids. And this series just kind of ballooned into this weird cult classic that would spawn dozens of fan-made games, music, art, videos, and I guess tarot. If any of you are familiar with like My Little Pony and the fandom that it birthed from, I want to say Generation 5, Friendship is Magic. So, you know, like the Bronies and the Pegasisters. This is kind of the same thing on a similar scope, I would argue. As a matter of fact, this is an excellent example of death of the author in practice to a certain extent. Fans actually affect the official franchise. Project Toho as a game was really a Trojan horse for the author Zune to peddle his amazing yet busy-ass music. He's not much of an artist, as his characters' designs weren't the most polished in the beginning. So sometimes die-hard fans offer design upgrades or headcanons, basically personality traits, physical attributions, or other speculations about a character, and if Zune is like, hey, that actually sounds like a great idea, he'll canonize it. My husband is actually the Toho fangirl, so I can't really say much else about this deck. Other than for any JoJo's Bizarre Adventure fans out there, I do think it's funny that the world is depicted by a character who can stop time. Okay, so I recognize that Toho, the Toho Tarot, was definitely still in that same ballpark of, you know, being anime style, but I still counted it as a game since it was a game adaptation. So that's gonna mean that the deck based on anime, and I only have one of these, is the Dobby Hawk's Lunar Flare tarot by multiple fan artists. And you can see a little bit more on my review about who was involved. But just as we discussed, that there can be a whole community based on small indie projects like Toho, there can also be an entire community dedicated to a single ship with a single fandom. Within a single fandom, excuse me. What is a ship, you may ask? Well, if you didn't see my review, just briefly, a ship is a phenomenon where a fan or community of fans speculates at best, daydream at worst, that two or more characters in a franchise enter in a romantic or sexual relationship. My Hero Academia is a Japanese manga and anime by Kohei Horikoshi, set in the future where humans have developed superhuman abilities called quirks. Due to the radical shift this would cause in their society, they constructed a hero society to combat villains who would use their quirks for evil, or more specifically in this case, to overthrow the hero establishment, which I will admit is really quite capitalistic if you're paying attention. Without giving away too many spoilers in this video, Dobby is one of the antagonists in the League of Villains, and Hawks becomes the number 2 hero by season 5. Hawks also happens to be a double agent, attempting to infiltrate the League of Villains with Dobby as his first contact. So this is Dobby, this is Hawks. You'll also occasionally see Dobby with white hair. That's his natural hair color. But anyways, you see where I'm going with this. Despite how much information and how many parallels there are between these two characters, this is one of those ships that most of the fandom has already accepted will just never happen in canon. I mean, like, even within the story, there's like 3 or 4 brief scenes with them together. So, you know, as a community, we cope by making and indulging in fan art until the canon breaks. You know, as one does. So this whole deck is indeed just a cope, for me, in the best ways possible. Featuring fairly popular fan artists of this particular ship. That's how vibrant this community is, by the way. Every once in a while, there will be popular ships, or excuse me, there will be popular like ship polls on Twitter, and all the shippers come out to duke it out. The Dobby Hawks fandom is the only one that I know of to use bribery. Like some of the artists featured in this deck will promise to post uncensored, not safe for work art pieces of Dobby Hawks on their Twitter pages if Dobby Hawks wins a poll. Which, by the way, most of their not safe for work art is usually behind a paywall on like Patreon. I know that because I'm a patron of one of them. But yeah, the community building is real. So yes, this is one of those few decks that I own where there are multiple artists for a single deck, and honestly, it's a pretty great deck that I actually use. As I mentioned in one of my previous videos, I thought this was going to be purely collectible since I bought it for thirst reasons, but it is a solid reader. I do hope to get the box signed by the English voice actors of these characters, though. So before we get into our honorable mentions, or I guess the one honorable mention that I have, definitely share with me if maybe there's a medium that I didn't include. We talked about anime, video games, tabletop games, film, cartoons, books. If there is any kind of pop culture medium that perhaps you want to cover in your VR, should you decide to do one and show off your pop culture decks, that would be awesome. But let's go ahead and get to the deck that I missed out on. By the way, did you know that decks like the Dobby Hawks Tarot are actually not uncommon? There are tarot decks that are circulated among fandoms by fan artists of that fandom for themselves and other fans. And very much so like the Dobby Hawks Tarot, it's done within their own circles on social media. I specifically remember on Tumblr circa 2021 where there was a tarot deck that celebrated the ship between Kylo Ren and General Hux from the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Isn't that wild? Now, if you want to talk niche, that is equally as much of a niche as Dobby Hawks, I would say. At least for those characters. Or that ship. There are several reasons why perhaps they wouldn't pursue more mainstream crowdfunding sites. I was really trying to think about this for a little while, and it could be several different reasons. Whether it is just a project for the fans to kind of bond over in a more controlled and safe space. Also, having a more mainstream platform could maybe attract like the wrong crowd. Like Kylux is a same-sex ship, and that could perhaps attract some pretty mean people, and that would be bad. Or it could just be wanting to stay away from other ships, because shipping wars can be brutal sometimes. I've seen what MHA does with their shipping wars, and I've seen what shipping wars can do to other fandoms like, you know, Avatar: The Last Airbender or Star Trek, I'm sure. I guess whatever the reason that it stays in its niche, I guess it just tickles me that these moments in time are dedicated for the little fandoms in like just the randomest pockets of the internet. And even though it sucks that they might feel like they have to hide their interests, I think it's great that they have like these little online communities to bond over stuff like this. So the deck that got away, however, did thrive on a crowdfunding site, and it was indeed based on a Star Wars ship, a heterosexual ship, but a ship nonetheless. And it was the Solaris Tarot. This was, as I said, another Star Wars deck. Despite this deck depicting many other characters in the sequel trilogy, it is a Reylo deck, so it contains references to Rey and Kylo Ren as a romantic pairing, which I guess is sort of canon unless you read the book adaptation, which I don't know why you would do that, but it's a fun little factoid for you that that ship is technically not canon in the book adaptation. She kisses him out of like gratitude or some shit like that, but that's neither here nor there. Either way, this is the one that got away. I saw it on Kickstarter. I think I even bookmarked it. Like, I saved it to the things that I wanted to be notified when there was like 24 or 48 hours left or something. But I didn't back it. And I kept asking myself, like, why didn't I back it? And you know what? Sadly, I think the campaign just kind of launched and ended before the brain rot set in. Despite how much I loved The Last Jedi and felt that the tension between Rey and Kylo Ren was actually like really good romantic tension, it was really just during that movie only that I kind of felt it. And I think I was also waiting for the final film to really see how I felt about that ship, because even though if it wasn't Endgame in the trilogy, then I mean, I still could have felt something for those two characters together. Not that it really matters, because I think by the end of the sequel trilogy, after the train wreck that The Rise of Skywalker came out, I think I just kind of settled, like, yeah, I think I'm more of a Kylo Ren and a General Hux kind of person. And granted, I didn't get the Kylux deck either. I think it was actually just a PDF file that you could download if I remember right. I don't know, I just never bothered, I guess. Not jumping on the Solaris tarot deck, however, was a little different because the ship wasn't like super prevalent in the cards. Like, looking back on it now, I really liked the art and just the depictions of the other characters in the sequel trilogy, but damn it, this deck is now out of print and actually goes for a lot of money on eBay, for I think a couple $100, and that makes me sad. You know what? Forget tarot. Tell me in the comments what your favorite ship is and what franchise they're from. So long as it's fiction, it's fair game. As per usual, all that I ask is that you make discourse and not war. I await your ships, and we'll catch you later. Bye!